You wake up. It's cold. Not freezing, but just cold enough to make you deeply resent the fact that you're alive in the 14th century. There's straw under your back, but not enough of it, and some of it smells faintly like goat pee. You shift your weight, and a flea the size of a lentil launches itself from your sleeve and disappears into the shadows. You don't panic, because you've long since accepted that you are 60% person, 40% flea colony. You're in a small wooden house with wattle and daub walls that are doing their best to pretend they're solid. They are not. Wind slides through the cracks with the confidence of a seasoned burglar. You glance over to the fireplace, a generous term for what is essentially a smoky hole in the wall, and find that the fire has gone out sometime in the night, leaving only the stale memory of warmth behind. It's a great day to be alive in medieval Europe, assuming you define alive loosely. Next to you, someone snoring. Could be your sibling, your spouse, or your grandmother. Hard to tell. You all sleep in the same room. Privacy is a myth invented by the future. Your stomach grumbles. You're not starving, not exactly, but you're what medieval people referred to as always kinda hungry. You sit up, and the straw sticks to your skin, because you sweat when you sleep. Not because you're stressed, but because there's no airflow, no deodorant, and your mattress is made of suffering. Now, before we dive nose first into a culinary journey through rotting mutton, fermented fish heads, and bread hard enough to file your taxes on, take a moment, yes, right now, take a breath, get cozy, fluff your medieval pillow, which is, let's be honest, just a sack of hay. And if you're enjoying this little historical spiral into the absurd, tap that like button and subscribe. But only if you're genuinely into this. I'm not trying to guilt trip you like a passive-aggressive friar. Leave a comment too. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing who's drifting off to sleep in Denmark or eating cereal at 4 a.m. in New Jersey. Okay, let's talk leftovers. It's easy to assume that people in the Middle Ages didn't have leftovers. That they just ate everything on the table like human vacuum cleaners. But no, they had leftovers. Oh, they absolutely had leftovers. It's just that what they did with them, how they preserved, reused, disguised, repurposed, recooked, and occasionally regifted them, is a tale both ingenious and mildly terrifying. You walk over to the wooden table in your one-room house. There are remnants from last night's meal still sitting there, a crust of bread so hard it could double as a weapon, a few sad turnip skins, a smear of something that used to be cheese, and a pot with an inch of congealed mystery stew at the bottom. It's not technically spoiled, yet. It's more of a suggestion of food than actual food. And here's the thing, you're not throwing any of it away. Because wasting food in the Middle Ages is like tearing pages out of your only Bible. It's sacrilegious, irrational, and could get you killed socially. This is a time when famine is always one weird summer away, and the only cold storage you have is a hole in the ground that smells like regrets. So what do you do with it? Let's start with the basics. Bread. Medieval bread is not the fluffy golden loaf of dreams. It's more like a dense, chewy brick of grain matter, sometimes baked with bits of wood ash or ground-up peas if times are tough. And times are always tough. If you had leftover bread and it went stale, which it would, instantly, you didn't toss it. You soaked it. You turned it into pottage, bread pudding, or trenchers. Trenchers were ingenious little slabs of stale bread used as plates. Yes, your dinnerware was edible. But not in a fun, Willy Wonka kind of way. More like this bread is too stale to eat unless I pour greasy meat juice on it for 40 minutes, and then maybe it'll soften up enough not to chip a molar. Sometimes you ate the trencher. Sometimes you gave it to the poor. Sometimes the dogs got it. But nothing was wasted. Ever. The richer folks would reuse trenchers and leftovers in slightly fancier ways. For instance, by disguising old meat as new meat. You know, standard nobles at a banquet stuff. They'd dice up scraps of yesterday's roasted pork, mix it with wine-soaked breadcrumbs, raisins, yes, raisins, and spices like cinnamon or nutmeg, stuff it into a pie crust, and present it as an entirely new dish. Because if there's one thing that crosses all historical boundaries, it's trying to impress your dinner guests with smoke and mirrors. Of course, refrigeration wasn't a thing. Your options were salt it, dry it, smoke it, pickle it, bury it, or pretend it never went off. Sometimes all six. Let's say you're a peasant and your family caught a fish yesterday. A big one. You cooked some of it. Now you have leftovers. You wrap it in linen, hang it in the coldest part of your cottage, probably near the drafty privy hole, and hope it doesn't go full biohazard by morning. If it starts to smell, you don't throw it out. You reboil it. Yes, again. Everything in medieval cuisine can be solved with more boiling. The stew pot, oh, that glorious, eternal cauldron of questionable nutrition, is where leftovers go to be reborn. Every day, new scraps go in. Leftover beans, wilted herbs, animal bones, cabbage cores, barley nubs. It's like a culinary black hole, swallowing everything that dared to be uneaten. This pot never empties. It just gets added to. Some households reportedly had stews going for weeks. Imagine the flavor. Imagine the bacteria. Imagine the dreams you'd have after eating that just before bed. Spicy. But it wasn't all just grim survival. Sometimes leftover food took on symbolic or charitable purposes. You might dry old bread and crush it into a thickening agent. Reuse fat to cook again. Collect bones to make stock. Even spent grains from beer making were repurposed, fed to livestock, baked into dense barley cakes, or chewed quietly while contemplating the bleakness of life. And then there's the church. The medieval church had rules about fasting and feast days, what you could eat, when, how, and why. Leftovers had to play by these rules too. You couldn't just go warming up Monday's beef on a Friday. That would offend the saints, the priest, and probably your neighbor who's already judging you for using actual butter instead of oil. Monasteries were little factories of food economy. They didn't just reuse food, they systematized it. Vegetable trimmings went into soup. Yesterday's bread went to the guest table. Meat bones were boiled, then ground up for broth. The monks even had a rotation system for leftovers, like the world's most joyless buffet line. If you ever wanted to experience food bureaucracy, the Benedictines had you covered. And of course, sometimes leftovers just meant giving it to someone else. If you were wealthy enough to have a household with servants or staff, you didn't waste your leftovers, you passed them down. This was actually a common and expected part of payment. Servants were often partially compensated in food. Not fresh food. Used food. So your half-eaten meat pie becomes someone else's full dinner. Very sustainable. Very medieval. At public feasts, there were even professional almonas, whose job was to collect leftover food and distribute it to the poor. Of course, by the time it got to the poor, it had already passed through several layers of gentry, squires, cupbearers, dog wranglers, and probably a rat or two. But hey, free food is free food, especially when your other option is boiled dandelion leaves and regret. Let's not forget that people didn't necessarily want to eat leftovers. They just didn't have a choice. The line between leftover and possibly fatal was very thin. And people constantly played a game of microbial roulette. If the meat smells a little off, spice it. If the broth tastes like despair, add garlic. If it's already moldy, scrape off the top and keep going. The medieval immune system had to be tougher than a knight's chainmail underwear. So much of food culture back then was about managing expectations. You weren't aiming for delicious. You were aiming for not deadly. That's the thing about leftovers in the Middle Ages. They weren't cute. They weren't about sustainability or creative recipe ideas. They were about surviving one more week, one more day, one more meal. You didn't Instagram your stew. You hoped it didn't grow limbs. And that's just scratching the surface. You wake up again. Except this time, it's not your creaky one-room peasant hut. No, you've moved up in the world, at least for tonight. You're in a medieval tavern, and the mattress you're drooling into is actually a sack of straw with a mysterious dampness in one corner. Your head is pounding slightly from the questionable ale you consumed last night, which may or may not have contained actual alcohol or just sadness flavored with fermented barley runoff. The room smells like wood smoke, onion breath, and someone else's armpit. There's a dog in here, probably not yours. He's asleep by the hearth, legs twitching like he's dreaming about chasing rats or biting a tax collector. You sit up. The tavern floor creaks like an old mun with opinions. You stretch, hearing a joint in your back pop with medieval finality. And then, you smell it. Food. Not fresh food. Not even hot food. But warmish, almost edible, and, crucially, free food. That counts as breakfast. Last night's stew is still in the pot over the fire because no one has cleaned it, and cleaning things is for the rich or the regretful. The barkeep has just added this morning's scrapings to it, a bit of carrot, some root vegetable that might be turnip adjacent, a sliver of yesterday's sausage that didn't quite make it into someone's mouth. You're not sure how old the stew is. No one is. No one wants to be. And this is your first meal of the day. You pick up a wooden bowl that might have doubled as a chamber pot at some point and ladle yourself some of the murky potion. It's thick, vaguely gray, with floating flecks of things that used to be ingredients. You chew carefully, not because it's tough, but because you're pretty sure something just moved. Welcome to the magical, greasy world of medieval tavern leftovers. See, the tavern is more than just a place to get drunk and pass out near a dog. It's the medieval equivalent of a fast food restaurant, a motel, a gossip hub, a social media feed, and occasionally a crime scene. And the food? It was all about efficiency, cost-cutting, and the art of repackaging yesterday's regret into today's menu. Leftover meat from last night's feast? Minced up and served in a hand pie today. Stew too watery? Add breadcrumbs from stale bread to thicken it. Too thick? Add wine, or ale, or just spit in optimism. Even the ale itself was reused. If the dregs from one barrel weren't entirely vile, they'd get mixed into a new batch. This is why every pint tasted a little different, like roulette, but alcoholic. The average medieval tavern cook was a master illusionist. If you gave them a handful of moldy cheese, 2 onions, and a piece of goose that had been dead long enough to have opinions, they'd make you a pie that almost didn't kill you. And remember, spices were expensive. So most food relied on texture to tell you how old it was. Is the pie crunchy? Could be the crust. Could be rat bones. You'll never know, and frankly, you're too hungry to care. Tavern leftovers weren't just practical, they were profitable. You could serve the same stew base for days. As long as you changed the garnish, a parsley sprig, a bit of crushed garlic, or someone's beard hair, it counted as a new dish. And customers expected it. No one walked into a medieval tavern demanding farm-to-table freshness. They walked in demanding hot and probably not cursed. And, if you were a regular, you got the slightly less horrifying portions. Because loyalty paid off in lower diarrhea risk. Let's step outside for a moment. It's morning, and the town is waking up. You hear the clanging of blacksmiths, the squawk of chickens that are definitely not laying eggs anymore, and the rhythmic slap of wet laundry against a rock. In the alley behind the tavern, a few women are scraping the soot off used cooking pots and pouring what looks like vegetable sludge into a trough. Not for pigs. For humans. This is the gruel station, where the truly poor, people who can't afford even a mug of beer, might get a ladle of boiled wheat paste with yesterday's stew drippings stirred in for flavor. It's not charity. It's survival. Sometimes, taverns would sell old crusts of bread at a discount to peasants. You'd buy it by the sack, soak it in water or broth, and call it dinner. Some of it was so hard that you had to smash it with a rock just to chew it. And what happens to the food no one wants? The bits too disgusting even for medieval appetites? Enter the pigs. Taverns kept pigs not just for meat, but as walking garbage disposals. They ate everything. Meat scraps, spoiled beer, bones, burnt bread. And eventually, when they were fat enough, they became the food. A perfect closed-loop system of horror. Let's pivot a little now, because you're feeling drowsy, and that's good. That means it's working. Let's take a short, dreamy stroll, past the tavern, down the mud-soaked road where your boots are now twice as heavy thanks to the generous gift of medieval puddles, and into a monastery. Ah yes, the monastery. Peaceful. Quiet. Smells like old parchment, beeswax, and cabbage. Everything echoes, even your thoughts. You shuffle into the kitchen, though technically you're not supposed to be here, and find Brother Godfrey stirring a large iron pot. He doesn't look up. He's focused. His entire being is devoted to maintaining the perfect rotation of this sacred sludge. This pot has been in service for, no one knows. Legend says it's older than some abbots. Every day, scraps are added. Bones, leeks, stale bread, lentils, drippings from yesterday's roast lamb. And every day, a few ladles are taken out and served to the monks. It's called perpetual stew. And yes, that was a real thing. The longer it cooked, the more flavorful, in theory. In reality, it was an ecosystem. A bubbling, semi-alive concoction that probably had its own personality. If it could talk, it would whisper, "Eat me, if you dare." Monks were masters of leftover recycling. They had to be. They lived by rules. Waste not, want not, suffer more. Bread was dried, then crumbled into soup. Root vegetables were mashed, fermented, or boiled beyond all recognition. Cheese rinds were saved and stewed into porridge. And if you think monks got better food than peasants, think again. Their diet was strict, and leftovers often weren't even theirs. Wealthy patrons donated food, sometimes after a feast, half-eaten pies, roasted fowl, chewed on bones. And yes, the monks would accept it, bless it, and reboil it. Holiness is about sacrifice, and sometimes that sacrifice is your digestive comfort. You might ask, didn't anyone ever get sick from this? Yes, constantly. Food poisoning in the Middle Ages wasn't a rare event, it was just Tuesday. Diarrhea was so common it didn't even count as a symptom. It was just the background noise of existence. But people built up tolerances. Or they died. Either way, the leftovers kept coming. Oh, and just when you thought we were done, let's talk about fish. Because in the Christian medieval world, you weren't allowed to eat meat on certain days, which meant fish was the go-to alternative. And it too got the leftover treatment. Salt cod was popular. By popular, we mean punishingly bland, chewy, and required 14 hours of soaking before it stopped resembling dried bark. Leftover fish? Made into pies. Dried. Reboiled. Chopped and shoved into pottage. Sometimes monks would turn old fish into something called garum, a fermented fish sauce. It was the medieval version of Worcestershire sauce, but more horrifying and probably illegal in several countries today. And yes, the smell was biblical. So whether you were in a tavern, a monastery, or just your own sad cottage with a carrot stump and a vague dream, you found a way to reuse food. Because waste wasn't an option. Leftovers were the glue that held medieval society together. Glue made of pork grease, mashed beans, and trauma. And you made it through the day. Your stomach is full of something. You don't know what. You don't ask. You just roll over, burp gently, and let your eyes close. But we're not done. Next time, we'll wander into castle kitchens, where leftover swan meat becomes a diplomatic gesture, and pies get reused in ways that would confuse even a modern Tupperware hoarder. For now, breathe in. Exhale slowly. Let the imagined warmth of a smoky hearth cradle your mind. Let the taste of old stew fade from your memory. And let that dog next to you dream in peace. You're both survivors. You wake up again. And this time, it smells expensive. You're not in a cottage or a flea-infested tavern or huddled under a thatched roof questioning your life decisions. No, you're in a castle. The walls are made of cold stone. The window has glass, actual, real glass, and it's only cracked in 3 places. You're wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of lavender and chic. And you can hear footsteps echoing through the stone corridors, light, fast, purposeful. That means kitchen staff. You're not nobility, of course. Don't be ridiculous. You're a servant. A kitchen drudge. Your official job title is probably something like turnspit third class or ladle polisher, but your real job is whatever the cook screams at you to do while hurling ladles at your head. And today, you're dealing with leftovers. Royal leftovers. Now, you may think that nobles ate like gods, roasted peacock, venison, fresh fish, pies filled with golden raisins and overconfidence. And they did. But here's the thing, they also wasted food on an Olympic level. Feasts were enormous, gluttonous displays of wealth and power. The more food left untouched at the end of the banquet, the more status the host had. Leaving food was a flex. But waste not, want not, unless you're rich, in which case it's waste some, and the servants will want for you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy this strange combination of sarcasm and food history. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's oddly comforting to know there's someone lying half asleep in Canada or Malaysia right now, pondering the fate of ancient meat pies. Anyway, back to you. You shuffle toward the castle kitchen. The air thickens as you approach. The smell hits like a battering ram, roasted meat, singed hair, boiled greens, soot, sweat, and a faint undercurrent of something sweet, maybe apple, maybe despair. Fires are already roaring. The scullions are clattering pans. Someone is shouting about eels. This is normal. On a long wooden table sit the remains of last night's feast. There's a half-eaten venison roast, bones picked clean around the edges. A mound of congealed pottage, still faintly warm. A tray of tarts, one missing its filling, the rest smashed like regrets under someone's boot. A peacock carcass, still sporting its rainbow feathers like it hasn't accepted its fate. Your task today is to help repurpose all this into something vaguely edible. For the staff, for the poor, for tomorrow's guests if you can disguise it well enough. You are about to enter the Renaissance art form known as medieval food upcycling. Let's start with the meat. The venison gets scraped off the bone, chopped fine, and mixed with onions, herbs, and breadcrumbs. Congratulations, you've just made rissoles. They'll be fried later in beef drippings, probably overcooked, and fed to visiting night squires, because they don't deserve the good stuff but can't die either. That would be paperwork. Next up, pottage. This one's easy. You thin it with some ale or water, reheat it, and add a few more root vegetables, preferably ones that haven't started growing eyes. The goal is to confuse the palate. If no one knows what's in it, no one can complain. The pies? Ah yes, the sacred pies. These are the medieval world's most advanced camouflage devices. Take anything, literally anything, wrap it in dough, bake it, and serve it with a smile. Yesterday's minced lamprey becomes tomorrow's savory tart. Leftover eel bits, mixed with almond milk and saffron, become an exotic delicacy. Pigeon bones? Bake them into a coffin pastry. No one will notice until it's too late. And that peacock? It's going on parade again. See, sometimes the cooked body of an animal, like a swan or peacock, was redressed in its own skin and feathers to look alive for dramatic effect. So even if the meat is dry and borderline tragic, it still looks magnificent. That's how you serve leftovers in style, with enough presentation to distract from the fact that it's the same bird from 3 days ago. Leftover fish? Fish pies. Fish stews. Fish jellies. Or, the truly haunting choice, press it into a mold with vinegar and gelatin to make aspic. Yes, that's right, medieval people invented meat jelly long before your grandmother did. Except theirs wasn't on a buffet table. It was in the great hall, served cold, jiggling like a terrified ghost. And then there's bread. Bread was the main character of every meal, and stale bread was a culinary utility tool. It was ground into crumbs to thicken sauces. It was soaked in wine to make sops. It was toasted and topped with cheese to become the proto-pizza of your dreams. If the bread was too far gone, it became trencher. That's not a type of bread, it's a plate made of bread. People ate off it. Sometimes they ate it. Sometimes it was collected afterward, scraped off, dried again, and fed to the poor. Or the dogs. Or both. Now, let's pause. Because it's quiet for a moment. You sit near the hearth, the pot bubbling gently. A roast turns slowly on the spit, crackling, hissing, dripping its fat into the fire. The smell is hypnotic. You're full from sampling scraps. Your feet ache. But you're warm, safe, and your tunic only smells moderately of onions today. You stare into the fire, half asleep, and wonder, how did we become so good at pretending old food is new? The answer, of course, is survival and class warfare. In noble households, not reusing food was a statement. Look how much we can throw away, it screamed. Look at our power, our surplus, our disregard for mortality. But behind the scenes, every crumb was accounted for. Because if you were a steward or a cook, your job was to make sure the Lord's money wasn't literally rotting in a barrel. Leftover cheese rinds, sent to the larder to flavor soup. Wine dregs, mixed into sauce. Roast beef ends, minced and pickled. Even the fat skimmed off stews was saved and used to fry tomorrow's fritters. And let's not forget dessert. Yes, the medieval world had desserts. And yes, they reused those too. Yesterday's tart crusts could be refilled with new custards. Old fruit was dried or stewed down into preserves. Marzipan trimmings were melted and recast into new shapes. And if all else failed, everything got soaked in honey. Because nothing says decayed disguise like a good drenching of sugar syrup. The kitchen hierarchy ensured that nothing good ever reached the bottom untouched. Nobles ate the first cuts. Knights and clerks got the seconds. Servants nibbled the bones. The rest went to the poor, if it wasn't already turned into meatballs and recycled back onto the table with a sprig of rosemary. Now, you may be thinking, wasn't there a better system? Something less gross. And yes, there was. It was called dying young. But let's not get morbid. Instead, let's drift through the castle pantry, where jars of preserved vegetables and smoked meats lined the walls. each one a time capsule of past meals. The pickled cabbage, made from what didn't sell at market. The smoked bacon, leftover bits strung up and dried in a chimney. The garlic cloves soaking in oil, a pungent mystery waiting to strike. Everything smells like salt, vinegar, smoke, and the slow rot of good intentions. And yet, it works. Because leftovers weren't just a necessity. They were an institution. They were food lore. Recipes passed down not because they were delicious, but because they worked. So as you rest your head on a sack of flour near the fire, drifting between sleep and the scent of yesterday's lamb, remember this. In the medieval world, every meal was built on the bones of the last. Every dish was a memory. Every crust of bread, a story. And you, lowly, tired, slightly greasy, you are the quiet hero of this culinary time loop. Let the fire crackle. Let the dog snore in the corner. Let the stew bubble one more hour before cooling into history. You'll be up before dawn. Because tomorrow, you're serving leftovers again. You wake up in the dark. Not the soft, romantic kind of dark. Candles flickering in a cozy inn, lute music echoing in the distance, mulled wine gently warming your fingers. No. This is deep, medieval cellar dark. The kind of pitch black that whispers, maybe this is where I die, every time you stub your toe on something damp and unlabeled. Congratulations. You've been promoted. Today, you're a cellaro. You manage the food stores of a large estate or monastery. You're responsible for keeping track of what comes in, what goes out, what smells like betrayal, and what's still technically edible if you squint hard enough and lower your standards to sea level. Your kingdom is the storeroom, an ecosystem of questionable cheese, barrels of barley, and root vegetables that haven't seen daylight since the Crusades. There's no refrigeration, no cling film, and no expiry dates, just you, your nose, and several generations of trial and error culinary trauma. Here's your morning routine. Step 1. Don't fall down the stairs. The stone steps are slick with condensation and the ghosts of spilled pickle brine. Step 2. Light your lantern. It's smoky and dim and makes everything look like a haunted oil painting, but it's better than total blindness. Barely. Step 3. Sniff the air. This is your primary diagnostic tool. A properly trained cellaro can smell mold, souring ale, and mouse droppings from 20 paces. You inhale deeply. Yep, someone forgot to rotate the smoked mackerel again. It's bloated and pouting like a disappointed ant. You sigh. The good news? Most of your food is already preserved, which is a fancy medieval way of saying desiccated, pickled, or salted to the point of becoming a chewing challenge. The bad news? That doesn't mean it's not rotting, just that it's rotting slower and in more complicated ways. Let's take a quick tour, shall we? Over here, the meat chamber. You've got sides of beef hanging from hooks, covered in a thick crust of salt and medieval optimism. They've been there for weeks, maybe months. The outer layers are hard as bone, but the inner parts might still be edible. Probably. You'll find out when the cook slices into it and either frowns or gags. Next to the beef, sausages. Strung up like garlands of doom. These are pork and blood, mixed with spices, dried in the smokehouse, and suspended until someone decides it's stew day. Occasionally, the links explode due to trap gas. You ignore the dripping one. That's a future you problem. And now, the fish. Salt cod. Salt herring. Salt eels. Salt regret. Basically, if it swam, it got packed in a barrel, buried under salt, and shipped inland where people stared at it suspiciously for a few weeks before boiling it into submission. These things could survive a siege, a fire, and your cousin Timmy's stomach. Ah yes, the salt. There are entire barrels of it. Salt was both currency and curse. Expensive to get, but absolutely necessary if you didn't want your winter meat to turn into a biological weapon. You measure it out carefully. Too little, and the beef goes off. Too much, and you've made medieval jerky so tough it could deflect arrows. Now, let's talk bread again. In the cellar, you have dozens of loaves, some freshish, some harder than self-reflection. Stale bread is stored and recycled into basically everything. But before it gets sliced up for stuffing or pottage, it might get handed out to the poor or used as a trencher or just chucked at someone during a kitchen argument. There are no food processors, no compost bins, and no OSHA regulations. There's just you. And this massive wheel of cheese that has definitely started developing a new personality. The cheese was made months ago from the milk of a cow that no longer exists. It smells like damp socks and existential dread. But don't worry, it's supposed to smell that way. Probably. You chip off a bit and taste it. Yep. Sharp. Salty. Maybe a bit too tangy. You cut away the suspicious rind, rewrap it in wax cloth, and mark it with chalk. Good enough. That's the highest rating available on the medieval food grading scale, which goes from fresh to tolerable to we do not speak of this. Across the cellar, large clay jars hold preserved vegetables. Cabbage in brine, onions in vinegar, beets in something brown. You do not ask questions. You just make sure the lids are tight and the contents aren't bubbling with unnatural enthusiasm. Next, you check the grain stores. Barley, rye, wheat. All waiting to be ground, baked, or boiled into mush. You stir the barrels to check for weevils. You find weevils. You scoop out the top few inches and pretend it's fine. Everyone else does. No one wants to admit they've eaten more insects than bread this month. And now, what you've been dreading, the wine casks. There's a faint smell of vinegar in the air. That means something's turned. You open the tap of a suspect barrel and fill a small cup. You swirl. You sniff. You taste. Yep. It's sharp. Sour. Unforgivable. This wine has become verjuice, unintentionally. But since nothing goes to waste, it'll now be used in sauces, salad dressings, and possibly hair treatments depending on the monk's mood. You slap a new label on the cask. Sour. Cooking only. Do not drink unless you're already crying. You return to your ledger, an enormous ink-stained tome filled with meticulous notes like salt cod, 9 barrels. 2 probably edible. Pickled eggs, do not open without warning kitchen. Honey, locked in chest due to theft from Brother Thomas. Again. Apples, stored in straw. Attracting mice. Consider cat. You also keep track of who gets the scraps. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, in a medieval cellar is thrown out casually. Bread crusts go to orphans. Soup bones to the poorhouse. Cheese rinds to servants. Fish heads to the dogs. Dog bones to the pigs. And pig scraps to someone else, probably. It's a closed loop of frugality and faint nausea. Sometimes, the monastery distributes leftover stew to the villagers. You prepare it in enormous cauldrons, yesterday's vegetables, leftover oats, the suspicious parts of meat you didn't want to admit were meat. It's hot, filling, and likely to induce a contemplative moment about the fragility of human digestion. The people are grateful. They bow. They eat. And they return every week. You've become something of a local hero. The keeper of leftovers. The saint of salvage. The savior of questionable pottage. Your work is not glamorous. It does not end in applause. But it matters. Because the medieval food system ran not on freshness, but on stretching. Everything had to last. Everything had to transform. One day's feast was the next week's stew. Last month's apples became next month's vinegar. Even spoiled wine could turn into a surprisingly effective floor cleaner. So you sit, finally, on a creaky wooden stool. You sip a mug of ale that tastes faintly of sadness and warm yeast. And you breathe in the air of the storeroom, not pleasant, exactly, but familiar, comforting, even. You've made it through another day, without poisoning the nobility. You've kept the weevils under control. You've only lost one sausage to mold and one to that hungry novice who keeps pretending he's just inspecting. The fire is crackling upstairs. Dinner is being served. Somewhere above, a monk is complimenting a pie he doesn't know was made from 3 different days of leftovers and something called mystery bird. And down here, you close your ledger, lean back, and close your eyes. You've earned your rest. Tomorrow, someone will drop a sack of turnips down the stairs, and the cycle will begin again. But for now, breathe deep. You're safe. You're fed. And your cheese only screamed once today. You wake up in a monastery, again. Because apparently, in medieval Europe, that's where the leftovers lived, died, and were gloriously reincarnated as breakfast stew. Today, you're not a Cellero. You're Brother Percival. Or Sister Joan. Or maybe just that one who keeps falling asleep during matins. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Your robes itch like theological judgment, and your stomach is already growling like a heretic. Good news, today's breakfast is bread and ale. Bad news, so is every other meal. Except on feast days, and fast days, and saints' days, and Lent, And every other day, when food becomes a metaphysical negotiation between sin, virtue, and how long you can survive on barley gruel before hallucinating Saint Jerome. Let's talk about monastic leftovers. Because when you live in a religious community with 100 plus other people, and you all eat together, and you have a fixed income based mostly on divine guilt and tithes, you don't waste anything. Ever. Not even the crusty bit of porridge stuck to the pot. That's tomorrow's bonus flavor. Here's how it works. First, you sit in silence. Meals in most monasteries are eaten without speaking. A designated reader recites scripture from a podium while everyone else tries to chew quietly. No talking. No eye contact. Just you and your eternal internal monologue. Is that yesterday's leak again? Why is my cheese vibrating? Did I just eat a feather? So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. I find it oddly comforting to imagine a bunch of sleepy people lying in bed thinking about spoiled fish heads. Let's keep going. Now, here's your daily menu. Morning, bread and weak ale. Midday, pottage, basically vegetable sludge with the occasional guest appearance by a lentil. Evening, maybe more bread or soup or whatever was left from yesterday. On Fridays, fish. On Sundays, joy. During Lent, suffering. And the leftovers? Those go through a spiritual transformation. First stop, the frater. That's your dining hall. Anything uneaten is collected. Bits of bread, half-eaten beans, suspicious stew residue scraped from the bottom of the communal cauldron. Next stop, the kitchen annex. This is where the recycling magic happens. And by magic, we mean an elderly monk named Brother Walter who smells like onions and guilt and has been cooking since before your parents were born. Brother Walter has 3 rules. Never throw out edible food. Everything is edible if you chew long enough. What doesn't kill you builds character. That crusty bread, soaked in broth for soup. The sad greens from Tuesday, boiled again. Maybe add some stale beer. Leftover beans, mashed into paste, mixed with old breadcrumbs, shaped into weird patties, and served with the confidence of a man who knows no one can complain out loud. Nothing goes to waste. Even the bones are boiled. The fat skimmed off. The marrow scraped and spread on bread like greasy, slightly tragic butter. Some monasteries even had a food reallocation system. Got extra bread? Give it to the almono, the monk in charge of charity. He hands it out to the poor. Got scraps that are too gross for people but too solid to ignore? Feed the dogs. The monastery has a few of them, mostly for guarding the herb garden and barking at unrepentant sinners. Got actual garbage? Congratulations, you've created pig food. The monastery might keep pigs, chickens, or goats. They love leftovers. They are the original compost bin, except they scream and bite and sometimes eat your sandals. You once saw a goose swallow a spoon. It haunts you still. But the real leftover innovation? That's the eternal stew. In some kitchens, the stew pot never truly empties. It just gets refilled. Continuously. Every day, new ingredients are added to yesterday's base. Carrots, turnips, cabbage, maybe a shred of last week's salt pork if someone's feeling generous. It bubbles for hours, like a cauldron of theological secrets. It smells vaguely like hope, tastes vaguely like ash. But it's hot, it's filling, and it contains nutrients. Probably. You, Brother Percival, are on kitchen duty this week. So you wake up early. Again. You trudge to the kitchens in your sandals. It's raining. It's always raining. Your socks are wet. Again. You stir the eternal pot. It sighs. You add chopped greens, a splash of sour wine, and the mashed remains of last night's barley cake. It thickens into something that technically counts as food. By noon, you're serving it to 50 other monks. They eat in silence. No one complains. Because this is how the system works. Food is sacred. Waste is sin. And everything must be reused. Even mistakes. Once, Brother Anselm accidentally added the vinegar barrel instead of the ale barrel. The entire stew turned acidic. Everyone's tongues went numb for an hour. It was added to the monastery's book of lessons between do not overcook the lampreys and boil nettles before serving. Speaking of nettles, you use them, too. And dandelions. And sorrel. And burdock. and anything else you can forage from the garden or nearby fields. Herbs are life. They turn sludge into semi-delicious sludge. You memorize the sacred quartet: sage, parsley, thyme, and whatever that weird plant his brother Thomas keeps insisting is good for digestion. Eventually, you graduate from kitchen duty. You return to your regular chores, praying, copying texts, and not talking. But you carry the lessons with you. You learn to smell cabbage from 50 paces. You develop a sixth sense for bad cheese. You know the exact moment when bread becomes a weapon. You've seen horrors: bean paste gone green, oat cakes that fought back, a fish pie that blinked. But you've survived. And now you sit, again, in the dining hall. It's evening. Candlelight flickers on the stone walls. Your bowl is warm in your hands. The stew tonight is thick, comforting, and vaguely orange. You don't ask what's in it. You don't want to know. You take a bite. It tastes like penance and garlic. You chew slowly. You breathe deeply. You feel your soul slowly reattaching to your body. And you realize, this, right here, is what peace feels like. Not luxury. Not excess. But enough. Enough food. Enough warmth. Enough to last another day in a cold, hard, beautifully weird world. You finish your bowl. You place your spoon gently on the table. And as Brother Walter shuffles past, muttering something about boiled parsnips and divine retribution, you think, thank God for leftovers. You wake up in a cottage so cold, even your dreams have frostbite. The thatched roof is leaking. The floor is dirt. Your blanket is made of sackcloth and ambition. And the family pig is snoring next to your feet like it pays rent. You open your eyes and immediately regret it. It's still dark out. Of course it is. Because medieval peasant time isn't measured by clocks. It's measured by livestock noises and the exact moment your bladder threatens to explode. You shuffle to the cooking hearth, which is a generous word. It's a pile of stones, ash, and last night's fire, which is now just a memory, and a small pile of resentment. You blow on the coals. They blink at you, unimpressed. You add kindling. You wait. You curse. The fire returns, weak and reluctant, like a teenager at church. And now, it's time for breakfast. Let's see what you've got. In the corner, a wooden bowl with something vaguely porridge-shaped stuck to it. It was oat gruel last night. Now it's cold oat sculpture. But no worries. You add a bit of water, stir with a stick, and hold it over the flame until it surrenders and becomes food again. Sort of. Welcome to peasant cuisine. No fresh eggs. No honeyed buns. No coffee, no bacon, no mimosa. Just warmed up grain paste and maybe a pinch of salt if you haven't run out this week. No Uber Eats. No brunch. Just a clay pot and a deep well of generational trauma. And if you're lucky, there's yesterday's crust of bread. Hard? Yes. Moldy? Maybe. Still technically food? Also yes. You cut off the green bits. If it's blue, you call it blessing mold and pretend it's medicinal, and you soak it in your porridge to soften it. It tastes like damp fireplace and guilt. But you chew. Because there is no alternative. And before we go on, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're actually enjoying this strange journey into edible despair. And let me know in the comments, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it in your corner of the world? I love imagining sleepy people everywhere, drifting off to the smell of pickled onions and 14th century suffering. Back to your kitchen. The main rule of peasant eating is this: waste nothing. Ever. That piece of leek you didn't finish last night? It goes in the pot. That chicken bone from the Lord's table you scrounged after Harvest Festival? Boil it 3 times. Then chew it like it owes you rent. Leftovers aren't just part of the diet. They are the diet. And leftovers of leftovers? That's innovation. Welcome to pottage. Again, pottage is your main food group. A stew, a slurry, a bubbling mystery that changes every day depending on what's in your garden, what's in your bowl, and what hasn't grown legs and run off yet. Today's pottage includes some wilted cabbage leaves, 2 turnip ends, the heel of a loaf from last Thursday, a suspicious gray thing you're calling root meat, a sprinkling of dried herbs you keep in a sock for flavor and superstition. You boil it for an hour, maybe 2. It thickens. It smells like honesty. You serve it with a wooden spoon and the casual resignation of someone who has no memory of ever being full. Sometimes, someone gets fancy. They roast a squirrel. or a hedgehog, or a bird that flew in through the window and forgot how doors work. These treats are rare, and when they show up, they're stretched very far. The meat is stripped. The bones are boiled. The fat is skimmed and added to your bread dough, which mostly tastes like rocks but now has a hint of animal and hope. You save every scrap. A bit of fat? Use it to grease the pan. An old onion? Slice off the rot. Dice the rest. Cry, both from the onion and your emotions. Carrot tops? Stew. Weeds? Stew. Boiled shoe leather? Possibly stew. And when food goes bad, like really bad, you still try. A little mold? Scrape it off. A bit of rot? Cut around it. Unholy smell? Mask it with vinegar. You only throw it out if it moves on its own or starts preaching to your children. Even then, only sometimes. And when there's nothing left, nothing, you get creative. You boil bark. You eat dock leaves. You mix flour with water and call it festival cake. You soak acorns, mash them into paste, and shape them into sad pancakes that taste like burnt dirt and ambition. Your body is mostly fiber, spite, and whatever nutrients happen to float by in your diet of relentless leftovers. And don't even think about throwing out food during winter. Winter is when the gods laugh. Your stores dwindle. You ration like a desperate squirrel. Everything you eat in February was made, gathered, or pickled 6 months ago. If you were smart, you dried apples, stored root vegetables in straw, and buried jars of sauerkraut in the garden. If you weren't smart, well, you chew ice and rethink your choices. Leftovers in winter are sacred. Bread crusts become soup. Soup becomes paste. Paste becomes filler for a pie with no meat, no joy, and an aftertaste of survival. You scrape the pot clean. You boil the bones twice. You eat slowly, not for mindfulness, but because you need the meal to last. Some days, the leftovers are better. You scored some fish heads from the river folk. They still have eyes. You try not to make eye contact. Into the pot they go. Fish head stew again. With herbs. Or possibly grass. The line is blurry. You've gotten good at making food illusions. You cut stale bread into cubes, fry it in leftover bacon fat once every 2 months, maybe, and pretend it's croutons. You flavor your stew with the rind of a dried cheese that smells like Viking socks. You mash beans into paste, shape them like sausages, and tell your kids it's a feast. They don't believe you, but they eat it anyway, because this is life, and leftovers are life. In spring, you might get wild greens. In summer, berries. In fall, apples and nuts. But winter? Winter is leftover soup, stale bread, and the slow realization that you've eaten the same onion 5 different ways since Christmas. And yet, you endure. Because you know the rhythm. You know how to stretch. You know that one crust of rye bread can be tomorrow's dumpling. And so, one cold night, you sit by your fire. Your stew bubbles in its little pot. Your spoon is worn. The pig farts gently in the corner. And you take a bite of lukewarm cabbage and turnip mush. You close your eyes. And for 1 second, it tastes like enough. You wake up choking. Not because someone's smothering you with a pillow, that's later, when the roast burns, but because the kitchen smoke has no concept of personal boundaries. You sleep in the scullery, next to the pickled onions, a barrel of lard, and a pile of fish heads that may or may not be trying to evolve into something sentient. Welcome to your new life as a cook's apprentice in a 14th century noble household. The good news? You're surrounded by food. The bad news? None of it is yours. The worst news? If you waste anything, even an inch of tripe, you will be yelled at so hard you age 5 years. Your name might be Will. Or Meg. Or you there, the idiot with the parsnips. It's barely light outside, but the hearth fires have to be stoked, the bread ovens primed, and the pots, so many pots, cleaned. Which means you, with your cracked hands and your dreams of maybe tasting chicken someday, get to start scrubbing with sand and vinegar while your boss, the master cook, glares at everything you do, like he's one bad turnip away from a nervous breakdown. This man has seen things. Spoiled eel pies. Burnt peacock. A veal dish that exploded. His beard is singed. His temper is short. His eyes are dead. He once stabbed a servant with a marrow spoon. No one blamed him. Before we dive into the entrails of your day, take a breath, and if you're still awake, like this video and subscribe if you're into this kind of unhinged historical insomnia content. And in the comments, let me know where you're tuning in from and what food you'd be most willing to reincarnate as if you were a medieval leftover. Now, where were we? Yes, breakfast. Not for you. For the Lord and Lady upstairs, who woke up to the sound of servants being berated for uneven porridge texture. You're in charge of the reuse table. This is where yesterday's remains go to either die gracefully or become tomorrow's special. Let's inspect today's offerings. A haunch of venison with one bite missing. Still good. Scrape off the oxidized bits. Reheat. Smother in new sauce. Done. A bowl of pottage gone, gelatinous overnight. Add hot water. Reboil. Rename it Hunter's Stew. A roasted pheasant with its head intact. Looks like it's judging you. Chop off the neck, dice the meat, and fold it into a pie with raisins and leftover gravy. Boom. Gourmet. Several egg yolks floating in a jar. No one knows why. Bake them into custard. Pretend it was planned. A piece of fish that smells. Bold. Add vinegar. If that doesn't work, call it salt cured. If people still complain, you're sick that day. Your job isn't just cooking. It's lying. With flair. This is the golden rule of noble kitchens. Every leftover can be made luxurious if you add enough cinnamon and lies. Spices, by the way, are your best friend. Especially if what you're covering up is mystery meat or trout that's gone philosophical. Cinnamon, ginger, cloves, nutmeg. Spices aren't just expensive, they're magical. You sprinkle a little saffron on some stale bread pudding, and suddenly it's dessert. You grind some pepper over a questionable pigeon pie, and the nobility starts murmuring about exotic flavor profiles. Do they know it's the same pigeon from yesterday, just chopped smaller and served in a crust made from leftover lard and flour swept off the counter? No, and they never will. Because you, dear apprentice, are part of a system. That system includes a chain of command longer than a boar's intestine. There's the master cook. Beneath him, the sauce maker. The potager, soup guy. The pasty maker. The roast turner. The scullions. The spit boys, yes, that's real. And at the very bottom, you. You handle scraps. Which means you're a food necromancer. You summon meals from what's left, discarded, or borderline illegal. Today, the lady of the house wants a dainty luncheon. Which, in noble speak, means 6 elaborate dishes none of us can pronounce. You're told to use what's already in the cold larder. Translation, fix the leftovers. First dish, cold roast pork. Reheated with apples and mustard. Easy. Second, yesterday's eel pie, rebranded as sea serpent en croûte. Third, a salad of greens, herbs, and leftover cheese rinds. Artfully sliced, of course. Fourth, a custard made from extra yolks, leftover milk, and a prayer. Fifth, fried bread soaked in honey. Made from bread you nearly threw out, but didn't because you value your life. Sixth, wine-soaked pears that were originally starting to go off, but now are sophisticated and complex. The Lord is thrilled. The lady calls it light yet satisfying. You call it a miracle of culinary gaslighting. Let's talk about the real challenge, meat reassembly. Leftover meat is tricky. It dries out. It smells weird. It turns gray. But in a noble kitchen, you don't serve leftovers, you serve galantines. What's a galantine? Oh, just a terrifying culinary Frankenstein made from boiled meat, finely ground with fat, mixed with breadcrumbs and spices, then pressed into shapes. Like meat jello. Wrapped in animal caul. Serve cold. You'd rather be eaten by a bear. But the nobility loves it. Also popular? Meat pies. Meat pies are the dump truck of leftover repurposing. You throw in everything: mutton, rabbit, poultry, cheese, gravy, half an egg, yesterday's herbs, old pastry, sadness. Bake it. Cover it in a decorative crust. Add a quail leg sticking out for drama. Suddenly it's dinner theater. And when something really goes wrong, like a roast catches fire or the soup curdles beyond redemption, you have one last savior: sops. Sops are slices of stale bread drenched in something else: broth, milk, wine, melted fat, and served as a bed for whatever hot mess you're placing on top. They absorb flavor. They disguise texture. They erase shame. You could sop a boot and convince the Lord it was a delicacy from Gascony. And if he dies? Well, good news. You're now cooking for the new Lord. Congratulations. You've lasted one day, which, in the world of medieval kitchens, is basically a career. You end your night covered in flour, goose grease, fish scales, and what may be custard. You sit on a barrel. You eat a leftover sausage you stole and wrapped in cabbage leaves. It's cold. It's chewy. It's technically edible. And you smile. Because you survived. And because tomorrow you get to turn spoiled rabbit into forest delight. Or maybe yesterday's pigeon into royal bird ragout. And as the fire crackles and the sauce pot simmers and the kitchen finally falls quiet, you close your eyes and dream of bread that isn't stale, soup that didn't start as an accident, and leftovers that love you back. You wake up to the sound of pigs fighting over a dead rat. This is normal. It's morning in a medieval town, and everything smells like someone tried to cook soup in a hue. The air is thick with wood smoke, rotting produce, cheap ale, human waste, and boiled mystery meat. It's the scent of commerce, of life, of 7 different types of stomach problems waiting to happen. You live in a cramped, tilting tenement above a tannery, which is great if you've always wanted your pillows to smell like boiling cow skin and failed ambition. The bed is straw. The blanket is you. You wear your only tunic until it turns into both pajamas and emotional armor. Today, you're heading out early to help a woman named Godlina. She's a street cook, a vendor of fast foods. And she is, without question, the most terrifying and efficient woman you've ever met. She once chased a tax collector with a roasting spit. He left with no shoes and a new respect for pottage. You call her Mistress Lena. She calls you Oi. Her specialty? Hot pies. Made from things. You arrive just as she's lighting her brazier. The setup is simple: a tripod over coals, a cauldron, a few trays of pastry shells, and a bucket labeled meat. You don't ask questions. You just stir. Because you, dear sleep-deprived friend, are in charge of making the filling, which is a kind word for leftovers so dubious they require 3 spices and a legal waiver. Today's mystery mix. Shredded lamb, probably, from a tavern roast no one finished last week. A few slices of ham with the green bits cut off. An onion that has definitely been reborn as a sentient being. Carrot peelings. Dried peas. 3 spoonfuls of yesterday's stew. A handful of gravy gravel scraped from the pan crust. Some old lard for lubrication. You mash, stir, spice, and pray. Mistress Lena adds cumin and nutmeg, yells more fat, and slaps the top like it's a used horse cart. Then the filling gets dumped into pre-baked crusts, sealed with pastry lids, and tossed onto a hot slab of iron to bake. 15 minutes later, boom, fresh meat pies. 5 for a penny. Served with sarcasm and no napkins. This is the beating heart of medieval leftovers, the street food stall. And it's beautiful in its chaos. Vendors sell everything. Fried fish, days old, reheated in dubious oil. Cheese fritters using milk from last Tuesday. Bean porridge, made this morning, but served all week. Hot wine, with enough spices to cover the taste of rot. Old bread, dipped in animal fat, and sold as toasts. There's a rhythm to it. A logic. A flavor that can only come from ambition, desperation, and a total disregard for modern hygiene codes. People buy these foods on the way to work. While gossiping. Before church. After funerals. During festivals. While trying to sober up, or when they're too tired to cook something at home, which, let's be honest, is almost always. And the vendors? They're experts in the economy of scraps. One man, known only as Big Tom, makes his living selling bowls of beef broth supreme, which is just bones boiled with garlic and a pinch of stale beer. But he serves it with a lump of bread and a wink, and people swear it's good for the soul. Another woman sells penny pancakes made from flour, eggs, and yesterday's apples fried in lard. Technically, they're dessert. Realistically, they're a holding mechanism for sugar and identity crisis. And then there are the aloes. The aloes. Women who brew beer in their own homes, often in the same pot they cook their husband's dinner in. Their ale is strong, cheap, probably full of sediment, possibly full of bugs, always full of character. You visit one on your lunch break. Her name is Maud. She hands you a cup that's warm, flat, and vaguely sour. You drink. It tastes like barley, vinegar, and a mild argument. You love it. Because in the medieval world, beer is safer than water. And drunk is often better than conscious. As you sip, Maud tells you how she uses old bread in the mash. Leftover porridge too. Bits of herbs. She stirs it all into the vat, lets it bubble for a few days, and boom, yeast magic. Nothing wasted. Everything fermented. She even uses old ale to make drunken pottage, a stew of beans, bread, onions, and last week's regrets, boiled in leftover beer. You thank her. You stumble back to Lena's stall. And that's when you meet the inspector. He's from the guild. Or the church. Or maybe just someone with a hat and an opinion. He asks about meat quality. About spice usage. About pest control, which is funny, because everyone knows the rats here are part of the union. Mistress Lena smiles sweetly. Offers him a fresh pie. He eats it. Declares it adequate. Moves on. You breathe again. Because if you're caught using spoiled meat or violating one of the 10 million obscure food laws, you get fined, whipped, or banned from selling. And then how will you afford your rent? Or your dinner? Or your weekly cup of sour comfort for Maud? So you keep stirring. Keep scraping. Keep inventing. Because this job is food alchemy. Leftover bread crust? Toast it. Dip it in egg. Fry it in lard. Call it French bread even though France doesn't exist in a way you recognize. Old sausage? Boil it. Slice it. Stick it in a pie with pickled onion. Soup from yesterday? Add lentils. Add turnips. Add hope. Call it peasant's brew. Every dish has a story. Every bowl is half memory, half gamble. Every pie is 3 days old and somehow still hot. And yes, sometimes it all goes wrong. The pot boils over. The meat turns. The stew smells like betrayal. But still, you serve. Because food is precious. And leftovers are holy. And in this city, where nothing is clean and everything is loud, the only way to survive is to cook fast, reheat creatively, and never, ever let the inspector see where the gravy really came from. By sundown, your hands are burned, your clothes smell like boiled goose and regret, and your belly is full of slightly expired stew. And somehow, you feel okay. Because today, you turn scraps into survival. And maybe, just maybe, you'll do it again tomorrow. You wake up underground. No, you're not dead. Yet. You're in a root cellar. A long, damp hole dug beneath the house. It's lined with stone, thick with mildew, and filled with the unmistakable scent of vinegar, onions, and disappointment. This is where your family stores food for winter. Not food, mind you. Not anything you'd find in a bakery window or on an Instagram plate. No, these are the survivors. The immortal leftovers. The jars and barrels and bundles that defy time, taste, and basic ethics. Welcome to the medieval pantry of the damned. You look around. You see hanging sausages that could double as medieval nunchucks. Turnips covered in mud and regret. Buckets of dried apples, some still with worms, extra protein. A tub labeled preserved eggs that should be illegal. And in the corner, something that's either a cheese or a religious relic. Let's talk about the methods. Because in a world without fridges, the only way to keep your food from killing you is to torture it into submission. First up, salting. Salt is the duct tape of medieval cuisine. It keeps everything together and masks the slow, creeping scent of decomposition. Got pork? Cover it in salt. Fish? Salt. Cheese that's crying softly? Salt. Your emotional wounds? Salt, obviously. You're in charge of the salting tub today. You're handed a leg of pig and a bucket of coarse white salt. You bury the meat. Then you bury it again. Then you press it down with a stone the size of your trauma. In a few weeks, it'll be preserved. Translation: chewy, gray, and a solid 40% sodium. If it gets moldy, just scrape it off. That's the medieval way. Mold is only dangerous if it writes you a threatening letter. Next, smoking. Smoking meat is part preservation, part performance art. You drag the salted cuts up to the smokehouse, a little shed where wood burns slowly and dreams go to die. The room is filled with haze. The air stings your eyes. There's soot on everything, including your soul. You hang the meat over the fire. You close the door. You wait. Hours pass. Days, sometimes. You return to flip the meat. Smoke curls around your face like a judgmental ghost. Everything smells like bacon and ashes. Eventually, you pull out something dark, shriveled, and oddly shiny. Congratulations. You've made smoked ham. or possibly medieval jerky, or possibly a crime. Then there's pickling. Pickling. The noble art of drowning food in vinegar until it stops complaining. Today you're assigned the pickling bench, which is not a fun picnic table, but a slippery wooden slab covered in onion skins and garlic peels. You chop cucumbers, onions, beets, eggs, sometimes herring. You pack them into jars. You pour boiling vinegar on top. You add mustard seeds if you're feeling rich. You seal the lids with wax, lard, or a prayer to Saint Botulism. A month later, you crack one open and taste pain. It's sour, sharp, acidic enough to etch your name into the lining of your stomach. But it's safe, probably. And that's the point. Pickling isn't about flavor. It's about fear. It's about survival. It's about tricking bacteria into giving up. Sometimes you pickle leftovers of leftovers, like stew scraps from a feast mashed up with lard and spices, pressed into a pot and sealed with a fat cap. That's called potted meat. It's terrifying. And yes, cheese was preserved, too. Don't get romantic. This isn't brie. It's not Gouda. It's not sprinkled with herbs and served on a charcuterie board next to someone named Olivia. This is hard, sour, unpasteurized cheese made by accident and then buried in ash, brine, or occasionally under your uncle's floorboards because he said that's where the devil won't find it. You don't slice this cheese. You chip away at it like it owes you money. There are also mold cheeses. Some were intentional. Others were just mistakes that got famous. Either way, if the cheese doesn't move, it's considered edible. If it does move, you name it, raise it, and open a food stall. Drying is another favorite. You string up apples and pears to dry in the rafters. They become leathery rings that taste like disappointment and fiber. Mushrooms? You dry them, too. Unless they're poisonous, in which case you dry them twice. Herbs are tied in bundles and left to hang until they crumble into the soup pot like tired little ghosts. Grains are dried, ground, stored in sacks, and then discovered by weevils, who throw wild parties in them when you're not looking. Every preserved item is a gamble. Open the barrel, and it might be delicious, or it might bite you back. Some families get really creative. There's a guy in the village who preserves goose in its own fat. It's called confit. He buries the meat in a pot, covers it in rendered grease, seals it, and stores it in the cold. When winter comes, he digs it up, scrapes off the green layer, and serves it with pride. Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes it's memorable. Others make fish sauces by fermenting fish guts with salt and leaving it in a jar for a few months until it becomes liquid. Then they pour it on food. It's called garum. It's Roman. It's medieval. It's evil. You try a drop. Your ancestors scream. And then there's leftover ale. Stale ale isn't thrown away. It's added to soups, to stews, to bread dough. It becomes part of everything. There are even recipes for ale porridge. It's warm, sloppy, slightly fermented, and makes your stomach feel like it's in a mosh pit. Still, it keeps you alive. Fruit was preserved, too. But not for peasants. Oh no. If you're drying apricots or boiling quinces in honey, you're probably rich or working in a monastery with a serious sugar budget. And even then, it's less about flavor, more about flex. Look at me, the noble says, offering a candy plum. I have fruit in winter. You nod and chew your dried turnip, wishing the plague would just come back already. So, why all this effort? Why spend hours boiling, smoking, pickling, and salting things into oblivion? Because food equals survival. And leftovers? They're the bridge between feast and famine, between harvest and hunger, between dinner and death by January. You don't waste. You don't question. You just store, seal, scrape, and hope. Hope that the salted fish holds, that the cheese doesn't kill you, that the pickled eggs don't explode again. And when winter finally arrives, and the snows pile high, and the roads disappear, you crawl into your root cellar, open that old jar of preserved meat scraps, and think to yourself, this could be worse. You eat. You survive. You complain. Because in the medieval world, the highest compliment you can give food is, it's not moving anymore. You wake up in a hay-filled corner of the manor's kitchens. There is gravy in your hair. Your shoes are missing. A roast peacock stares at you from the table like it knows what you did. Welcome to the morning after a medieval feast. Your head is pounding. Your mouth tastes like old meat in victory. You vaguely remember a lute, some regrettable dancing, and someone shouting "Boil the hedgehog" to thunderous applause. But today is not about what happened last night. No, today is about what's left over. Because the feast is over. The guests are gone. The trestle tables are covered in congealed splendor, and you, unlucky kitchen squire and part-time scullion, have to clean it all up. Welcome to the medieval after-party leftovers edition. Let's start with the scale. Feasts in the Middle Ages weren't just meals. They were edible power plays, culinary bragging rights. The nobility didn't host dinner parties. They hosted medieval food raves with 20 courses, live music, dancing bears, and 3 types of swan, 2 of which were on fire. And what do you get when you cook for 300 people using no refrigeration, 7 entire boars, and a kitchen staff powered by pure trauma? Mountains of leftovers. Absolute mountains. We're talking trenchers, those hard, stale bread plates, stacked with uneaten roast goose. Dishes of custard melting into weird little puddles of shame. Baskets of limp herbs, forgotten figs, and discarded marrow bones scattered across the floor like battlefield debris. There's a half-eaten eel pie leaking into the rushes. A gravy boat that someone drank out of. A vat of mulled wine with a spoon still floating in it, presumably in memory of the steward who passed out mid-toast. And you are here to sort it all out. Why? Because the medieval world doesn't waste food. Not because they're eco-conscious, but because every scrap is currency. So, what actually happens to all this food? Let's begin with the dogs. Yes, the literal dogs. The nobleman's hounds, who definitely slept in better quarters than you, are first in line for the good scraps. They get the marrow bones, the chewy bits of mutton, the crust soaked in meat drippings, and sometimes an entire trencher just for being a very good boy. You watch a greyhound daintily gnaw the roasted wing off what may have been a goose, a buzzard, or possibly something invented just for last night's menu. Next come the lower servants. That's you. You get what didn't make it to the Lord's table, the slightly burnt pies, the stews that were too peppery, the bread ends, the cold porridge that's congealed into a tragic pudding. Some of it's good. Some of it's suspicious. All of it is better than what you usually eat. You grab a handful of dried fruit from an overturned compote dish, chew on a hunk of salted beef, and call it breakfast. Meanwhile, the kitchen mistress, a terrifying woman known only as Mother Braise, has begun her true work, preservation triage. She's like a battlefield medic for meat. She moves down the table like a general, shouting orders. Reboil this stew. Twice. That venison's still good. Carve off the mold and pickle it. Any fowl not eaten gets plucked and dried. Heads off. Feet to the dogs. Scrape the fat from the pie crusts. We'll use it for tallow. These custards? Feed the monks. They don't know joy anyway. And then she gives you the death glare. You immediately start collecting cold meat pies with all the enthusiasm of a condemned man folding laundry. Let's talk about feast logistics. Because noble feasts are organized like military campaigns. There's a pantla bread guy, a butler, wine guy, a spicer, fancy guy, a scullion, your kind, and a neuro, who handles water like it's liquid gold. Every one of these people is now trying to figure out what to do with 700 pounds of leftover that could either be eaten, fed to animals, preserved, or offered to the poor. Yes, that's right. Charity. Because nothing says godly virtue like giving leftover lamprey jelly and 3 cold pheasants to starving villagers while the musicians are still drunk in the pantry. The church calls this almsgiving. You call it damage control. But it's not always generous. Sometimes it's strategic. You donate the leftovers publicly, usually through the parish or local monastery, and get social points in return. The Lord gets credit for being charitable. The poor get half a trout and some pottage scraped off the floor. Everyone wins. Sort of. And then, there's repurposing. This is where medieval cooks become artists. They turn leftover meat into rissoles, meatballs rolled in breadcrumbs and fried in lard. They mash cold beans with herbs and spread it on bread like proto-hummus. But worse. They chop up last night's roast, add wine, raisins, and vinegar, and invent something called cold hash with sweet wine sauce, which sounds like dessert but feels like betrayal. Even dessert gets recycled. The leftover fruit pies? Reheated. The custards? Mixed with day-old bread and turned into a pudding so dense it could be used in construction. The marchpane sculptures, the almond paste statues of saints, lions, or that time they made an edible cathedral, are carefully broken down and handed out piece by piece like sacred relics. You get a crumb of Saint Almond. You are blessed. And let's not forget reveler's guilt. Because while the noble guests were eating themselves into oblivion, someone always overdid it. That guy in the red hose? Yeah, he threw up behind the tapestry. Twice. The lady who tried to sing an entire ballad about her dead peacock? She's still asleep in the buttery, curled up next to a jug of wine and a half-eaten apple tart. Eventually, they stagger home, their silk shoes sticky with syrup, leaving you and Mother Brace to sweep up what remains. You scrape a dried-out roast swan carcass into a bin. You dodge a passed-out minstrel. You wash wine cups with a rag that hasn't been cleaned since the last plague. And finally, you're allowed to sit. Just for a moment. You chew on a piece of mystery meat. It might be veal. It might be hedgehog. You don't care anymore. Because the feast is over. The glory has faded. The leftovers have been sorted, saved, served, stored, or stealthily eaten. And tomorrow, it starts all over again. The Lord is planning another banquet. And you've just been told the theme is 14 types of poultry and 1 live bear. You sigh. You reach for the cold rissoles. You eat. Because even in the most opulent halls of medieval excess, leftovers are eternal.